In this episode of Children of Heroes, we travel just a few blocks from the embassy to Notting Hill, where we talk to Mr. Michael Vavrinek, son of flying officer František Vavřínek.
Thank you for participating in our project Children of Heroes. Your father served in the Royal Air Force during the Second World War. Can you tell us how he became a pilot and how he came to the UK?
Yes, well, he started his working life in his hometown Vsetín in electrical manufacturing company, but he really wanted to be a pilot. So eventually he was accepted at the military training school, Prostějov, and he became professional Czechoslovak military pilot. Then after the occupation of Bohemia and Moravia by the Nazis, he went with a group of Czechoslovak pilots to Poland, where he served briefly in the Polish Air Force fighting the Germans. But of course Poland was very quickly overrun. Though I'm happy to say the Poles did give my father and 3 other Czech pilots a medal for that. The only way to escape was to go east into the Soviet Union. The problem was at that time there was the Ribbentrop-Molotov agreement between Germany and the Soviet Union, and all of these Czech pilots in effect were put in prison in the Gulag archipelago. After about 18 months, whenever it was, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union and the Russians released them. They were transported down to Odessa on the Black Sea, where they boarded a ship which took them to Palestine, at that time under British control. So in Palestine he joined up with the British, and then because the Mediterranean was too dangerous, they got on a boat from the Red Sea and went right around South Africa and eventually arrived at Liverpool.
After Liverpool?
That group immediately joined the RAF. Then my father became a member of the new Czech Fighter Squadron 313.
How was his experience from the war?
It was the best time and the worst time for him, because every day you don't know if you're going to live or die. But on the other hand, for a young man from Vsetín, this was a huge adventure for him. A little extract from my father's RAF logbook. It's all completed in English. But here there's one exception. Against scramble, my father has written Pruser, which I leave you to translate.
After the war, he and your mother returned to Czechoslovakia?
Yes, well, during the war, my father, like many Czech airmen and soldiers, married English girls. I think it was about 800 or 900 English women, something like this, went to Czechoslovakia as wives of Czechoslovak military men. And mother was looking forward to a new life in Czechoslovakia. She was learning Czech. My mother and father were living in Prague, and I was born in Prague. This is my mother and father with the pram. I think this is in Stromovka, the park. And my father continued his life as a professional military pilot, as a senior officer in the Czechoslovak Air Force.
After the communist school in February?
Well, that, of course, was the big disaster. My mother was a very intelligent lady who followed political events. She could see what communism would mean, and in, I think it was November 1948, she took me on a holiday back to her home, to where her mother was living near Manchester, and after thinking about it, decided to stay here in England, principally for my sake, so that I could grow up in a free country. She didn't want me to grow up under communism. My father had a completely different problem. He could have tried to escape. People in his position did escape across the border, but some were shot by the border guards doing it. But he stayed in Czechoslovakia, particularly to look after his own mother. Because you see, during World War II, the Germans knew that my father was in England, so they arrested both his mother and his brother, and for some time the Gestapo put them in prison. And my father was worried that the communists would do the same thing again. And of course, this was a serious and realistic worry. Quite a few of my father's friends, airmen who'd been fighting in the RAF, were put in prison by the communists. In 1950, he was expelled from the Czechoslovak Air Force as politically unreliable, and he was not allowed to get any highly qualified job. So he went back to Vsetín and worked as an electrical repairman. Then after Stalin went, there was a general easing over all of the communist countries, and my father was able to get a better job working inside as a dispatcher for the transport company ČSAD.
Were you able to keep in touch with your family?
Only very slightly during the 1950s. I remember when my mother was still alive, she had one telephone call with my father. This was difficult to organize because my father didn't have a telephone at home, so he had to book the call at the post office. And my mother was thrilled to talk to him, and we would get a letter at Christmas time. However, one sad part of the story was that my parents got a divorce. My mother did this principally so that my father could supposedly cut his contacts with the West so that he would be, under less suspicion from the communists. After Stalin died and Khrushchev denounced him, the situation eased up. So in 1960, my father was able to visit England for the first time. This is my father on his visit. I was 14 years old. So this was the first time I saw him. From the age of 2 to 14, I never saw my father at all. A sad part of the story was that my mother died when I was 12 in 1958, so my parents never saw each other again. So he visited in 1960 and again in 1962, I think. He came for a second visit. But after that, my contact with my father was by me visiting Czechoslovakia. So in 1965, when I was a student at university, I visited Czechoslovakia for the first time since 1948. This would be 1965 or 66 on a visit to Bratislava with my father.
You studied mathematics and physics.
That's right. I was fortunate to be quite good at maths. Just to give you an idea how sort of forward-thinking my mother was, it was always her ambition that I should go to Cambridge University as a student, and that's what I eventually succeeded in doing.
Did you like it?
Oh yes, Cambridge was great fun, and I met many interesting people there, and eventually got a degree, which it's something which opens doors for you. This place is the new boathouse for Latimer Upper School. You keep the boats there, you go and collect the boats, you take them out onto the water, and go for a row.
Why do you like rowing?
To begin with, I didn't like it. But you see, I was even worse at football, and I didn't want to play rugby. So I had to do it. But gradually over time, I began to enjoy it. And that was a good basis for me. So I continued rowing at Queen's College, at Cambridge. Rowing is an interesting sport because it creates a very close camaraderie. So I was able to get a job with an English company manufacturing computers. They'd advertised in the newspaper that they wanted people to work in the East European department, including Czechoslovakia. So I thought, that's a good job for me.
And this company later sent you to Prague.
That's right. I started work there at 1967, getting my basic training in how to program computers. And then, of course, the invasion came in 1968. So I thought, that's the end of the story. There'll be no further chance of going to work in Czechoslovakia. But in actual fact, the results of the invasion in 1968 from the business and commercial sense were not so severe. My company, English Electric Computers, which later became ICL, was able to continue selling computers in Czechoslovakia, and in fact I was able to start work there in January 1969.
Was it difficult for you to return to communist Czechoslovakia? My
company, ICL, was officially accredited in Czechoslovakia. You had to have special permission as a foreign company to have your employees resident in Czechoslovakia. Very few companies had this. ICL had it, and Shell Petroleum Company had a representation with some English employees in Prague, but very few others. So it was all officially done with the communist government because they wanted computers.
During your stay in Prague, you were followed by the Czechoslovak secret services.
All the foreigners who were resident in Czechoslovakia at that time would experience some attempt from the StB to try and recruit them as agents. So my experience was not different from anybody else's. A particular way the StB tried to get at me was to remind me that I still had Czechoslovak citizenship, and by the way, isn't it time I did my military service? And this was quite a scary threat, because in my British passport in those days there was an explicit warning that if, as a British citizen, if I was a dual national, then the British government couldn't help to protect me. So the threat was quite real. What happened was that when I went to renew my residence permit at the aliens office in Prague, in Bartolomějská ulica, where the StB had their base, where Václav Havel was interrogated, I was drawn in for a special conversation with the StB, and they tried to be very friendly and, said, we can solve this problem, you won't have to do any military service, but we'd like some help from you. We'd like to have your secret prices for your computer equipment. And I said, we have no secret prices, all our prices are published. But I knew really what they wanted. What they wanted was our manufacturing costs. Because if they know our manufacturing costs, then they know how much profit we're making. It can be useful commercial lever to bargain with us to bring the price down. But I just pretended to be completely ignorant of this. And so then they tried another trick. They said, let's come and have a conversation about this in the cafe across the road. We had a warning by the British counterintelligence about how the secret services in the Warsaw Pact countries, how they operate. And one thing they like to do is get a photograph of you as incriminating evidence. But again, the British had warned us. So I said, no, thank you. I don't want to have any unofficial conversations in the cafe. Immediately afterwards, I went to report all this to the British Embassy. And in those days, the British Embassy was still in the same place where it is now, in Tunovská ulica in Prague. But at the beginning of the street, there was a door in a wall with a little spy hole. And that was a camera that the STB had to film everybody going in and out of the British Embassy. So I turned round and looked at it so they'd see my face, so that they would know that I'd gone straight to the British Embassy. The big thing was that if I've revealed everything to the British Secret Service, I'm then useless to the Czech Secret Service, because the British know all about me.
You later moved into finance, working for an American bank. I suppose it was a completely different experience.
A completely different change, yes. After 10 years working in computers, again, I saw an advert in the newspaper from Merrill Lynch, an American bank, for people with international experience, with a good education and sales experience. So I said, oh, well, I got all of that, you know. So I went along for an interview and fortunately I got the job.
And did you like it?
Oh, it was great fun, yes, I enjoyed it very much. I was there for 35 years. I was working in their department for giving financial advice to private clients. So I was advising wealthy people on investments in the stock market, that sort of thing.
What impact would you say your Czech heritage has had on your life?
Oh, well, I have always been very interested in Czechoslovakia, and after my visit in 1965, although the country was still very much suppressed by the communists, you could see that the people wanted something better. They want a free life. And even under communism, there are certain parts of Czech life which were able to continue. I'm thinking particularly of sport and the arts. My mother bought her first television in the 1950s so that she could watch Jaroslav Drobný play at Wimbledon. And then in the arts, well, particularly in music, of course, Dvořák, Smetana, and Janáček. I was always keen here in England to talk up Czechoslovakia, because for the ordinary English person, all of those Warsaw Pact countries were something of hopeless cases where no real life. So I was always keen to explain to English people, well, actually, there's something good in Czechoslovakia.